when we experience pain, sometimes the terms that are used for these injuries are like overuse injuries. And so one of the concepts we were going to discuss is like the idea of it's not overuse, it's like underprepared.
Yeah.
So talk to us a little bit. We're kind of already in that realm.
Yes.
But for you, like that term underprepared, what does that mean to you?
So, I mean, first of all, I love the idea of just reframing it, right? So reframing it in your mind literally changes the problem, which is really cool. We have that kind of ability to take whatever obstacle or problem we're facing, and if we can reframe it, we can look at it from a completely different angle and then choose how we respond to it.
Yeah.
Right. So overuse injury, that implies just that, okay, it's overused. So now I need to stop doing stuff.
Yeah.
I need to chill, which, rest is good. But if we look at it from the perspective of it being an underprepared injury, that means we have some work to do in order to prepare our bodies or prepare that specific area of the body to be able to handle, whatever it is we throw at it.
Yeah.
So, with this kind of injury, an underprepared injury, it's basically just the idea that your body, the tissues in your body, can handle a certain amount of load, right? And the equation for an injury is if a force or a load goes into the tissue that is greater than that tissue can handle, there's going to be an injury, right? And that can happen in an instant, right? Like an instantaneous acute load that is too much for the tissue to handle. And, we get some sort of tearing or, or probably not you could break a bone. Obviously that'd be
insane.
You hit the ground hard and you break your leg. That's what happened. The too much force went through the bone. But, with gym injuries, it's almost always like some sort of soft tissue thing, right?
Yeah.
Or across time, the load going into that tissue was more than the tissue could handle or more than the tissue could recover from, right?
Yeah.
And that's kind of where the idea of like overuse comes from. But again, if we prepare and we make something stronger and more resilient, then we're going to be more prepared to handle whatever it is that we're doing. So, yeah, that's the idea of underprepared versus overuse. So we want to prepare that tissue now to handle more.
Yeah, and I like the concept too of it's not avoidance, even though that tissue may have some warning signs going on of like, hey, let's chill out. You want to give it the space and the time to heal, but there's other things that we can put our emphasis on to keep moving forward. I think anytime we face injury, there's kind of a few different ways we can like navigate it. I think the first person where you get some of these overuse injuries is, you slap that tape on the check engine light as your body's giving you those signals and you're like, it's no big deal. Let me just keep pushing through. And eventually it gets to the point where it's maybe too far gone. But then there's that other like viewpoint of saying, hey, this is talking to me. Let me address it. And now what are some things I can fill my tool belt with to create preparedness with it specifically and not let it totally like throw me off track if I want to stay accountable to my goals and keep my body moving and all these habits that I prioritize and et cetera.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, your body's always talking to you, right? So yeah, if you ignore it long enough, it's going to get to the point where you probably do need to step back and take time off.
Yep.
But if you're having a nagging injury or some sort of pain, and it's still pretty early on, or it's not, too intense yet, then that's definitely something that you can work with and work through, if you're just intelligent about how you do it.
Yeah.
Right. Movement and blood flow are fantastic for healing.
Absolutely.
So doing nothing isn't necessarily the answer unless you have a really serious acute injury that you need to let heal for a little bit.
Yeah.
But even then, like when you have an ACL surgery or something nowadays, they put you in like a continuous movement brace so that joint never stops moving. So
and like joint replacement kind of stuff. Like, dude, you're up and walking right away or whatever it may be.
So we've started to discover more and more that movement and blood flow are super important for healing versus just resting and doing nothing.
Yes.
So that's the other angle to look at it from is like, okay, this hurts. Okay, how can I work with this body part or with this movement at a level that is pain free, right? And that's this. I really like, multiple people have kind of popularized this idea or this kind of strategy to training or preparing the body for training in sports. But Ben Patrick, knees over toes guy, a lot of what his philosophy is based around is pain-free ability is what he calls it specifically. But, just because your knees hurt doesn't mean that you can't go knees over toes or you can't train your lower body. Like, that's his whole thing. He had really jacked up knees and had, all sorts of injuries, surgery on one, no surgery on the other. And he found a way to progress himself to where he's at now. And if you guys don't know, he's a basketball player, and he's got like a 40-inch vertical, and he's popular on Instagram for doing some crazy stuff. But he's also like a very intelligent coach, and he walks the walk. But he is someone I look to in this space of like overuse or underprepared, because his whole strategy, his whole training ethos is around preparing tissue to handle load. And you start with whatever you can do without pain, and you work from there, and you slowly build up over time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's good. Yeah. And that's just it. There's always like a starting point that's right sized for you, and figuring out a way that you can navigate over time, progressing into, it's not like, if I have a meniscus tear, it doesn't mean that I'm going to ask you to, go into like an ass to grass lunge and drive that knee over the toe, because chances are could make matters worse.
Something's going to give.
Yeah. Yeah. We talk about going back to the word overuse. Like, you think about like an engine that doesn't have all the pieces kind of in the right order. If I'm doing a squat as an example, and maybe I have just this little ailment where my body has found this path of least resistance, and over time I do this thing that's maybe not, perfectly balanced and aligned, that little kink or, in the armor eventually is going to, like you said, it's going to take the brunt of all that force. And that's where you start getting that paring down. So it's a matter of, okay, what can I do to kind of bring everything back in line, even if it's a matter of backing off load, backing off reps, even backing off sets. Maybe it's, let's take the squat, for example. Maybe you're changing that depth and you're sitting to a box to where you're getting to that more comfortable position. Like you're explaining, like doing what you have the capacity to do pain-free, so that over time, as you make that effort to focus on this specific thing and be intentional, then you'll be able to kind of move back forward. So it's almost like 2 steps back to take that step in the right direction.
Yeah, absolutely. And you brought up a good point there of like, you were talking about the squat specifically, and, you were saying if something's out of alignment, let's say your left knee is just caving in every time you squat, over time that might cause a little bit of a quote unquote overuse injury, right? With one part of your knee, because it's not aligned as you're doing the squat.
Yep.
So one approach, like we were just talking about, would be, okay, how do you bulletproof your knee so that even if you do fall out of alignment, it's not going to be an issue? And then the other approach is, how do we make your squat perfect, or how do we improve the pattern so that the knee is always in alignment and you're not going to get that overuse injury? You know what I mean?
Yep.
So there's both perspectives here, and there's both ways to look at the problem. But I think for me, it's always, why not utilize both?